The Little Prince. So, believe it or not, I've managed to make it this far in my life without ever having read The Little Prince before now. Um, yeah, what is everyone's experience with this book? I'd be interested in hearing about when you read this book, how much influence this book had on your childhood. I mean, it's cited often as like a classic children's book, but it was not a big part of my childhood. The first time I ever remember hearing about it, to the best of my recollection, was in high school, in which I became aware that this book was associated with French language students. I did not take French myself in high school. I took Latin instead. But I think I became aware that this was something that people who were taking French classes were required to read or encouraged to read or exposed to or something like that. And it was introduced as like a children's classic that everyone was aware of, and I was not aware of it. I was not terribly bothered by it, by not being aware of it. And I had this image for the long time of this being a picture book, and it is a picture book, but it also is a picture book with a lot of texts in it. So it's, I guess, somewhere between a novel or a picture book or a novella. Anyways, this I sorry, let me back up. Because I thought it was a picture book, I did not think it was worth tracking down and actually reading for the longest time. Um, this edition I have here, I actually bought as a gift for my wife years ago. I think 6 years ago now, back when we were still dating. So my wife, I think, had been exposed to this book before, and she had studied French when she was in school. She's Vietnamese and learning English as a second language. For years, I would get her books on her birthday or Christmas to help her with her studies. Until she's rather recently given me hints that she would prefer not to get books all the time as presents. So I've switched up my gift giving, but yeah, she was reading it here. She made some notes to herself with the vocabulary. So boa constrictor, large snake. She wrote there in pen. Again, she's learning English. This edition I got her is the augmented reality version, in which if you download an app from the Google Play Store, you can get certain images to pop up on your phone in 3D. And of course, when I say 3D, I don't literally mean three dimensions, but you know that illusion uh, that is presented on flat screens where it looks like something has depth. You know what I mean, right? Um, which we did that once on my wife's phone. Downloaded it, scanned the QR code, and with a few of these images, we did get them to pop up on the phone. But it it's a gimmick. It's not really anything that adds to the enjoyment of the book. It was pretty lame as things go. So I'm not sure I'd recommend the augmented reality version. In fact, I was looking on Amazon just now, and people were complaining that the augmented reality app didn't even work in certain countries. So they paid all this money for the book and couldn't get the augmented reality app to work. But I'm not going to talk about that. There's more than enough to talk about just concerning the normal text of this book. Anyways, my wife was looking through it. I did not have a desire to read through it myself. But recently, life has progressed. We are now married and we have a 3 year old daughter. And the 3 year old daughter has become very interested in this book to the point where she wants me, me or somebody to read it to her every day. Um, Now, she doesn't actually understand the words to it. Uh, but you know how kids are. They like the act of being read to at a young age, even before they can understand all the words. But what will typically happen is, because there are a lot of texts here, we'll get maybe to chapter 4. We rarely get farther than chapter 4, where she'll either lose interest or she'll want to flip to the ending. So the past few weeks, I've been spending a lot of time reading this to my daughter, reading the beginning chapters and then parts of the ending, but not having absorbed the whole book. I got a little curious about the book because there's some weird stuff going on here. So then I started spending time on Wikipedia, reading about the book or reading about the biography of the author, the Wikipedia bio, who it turns out is an interesting guy, and was beginning to realize that, well, number one, there's enough text here where it's not really a children's book. I don't know if it's a proper book either, but it's not the Cat in the Hat. It's not just a picture with a few lines of text that are mostly 3 or 4 words. So I decided that there's enough here that I can count it for the book review project that I've got going on this channel and on my blog. Hence, here I am with the book review. And I also decided that based on all the stuff I was reading on Wikipedia, that this book was influential enough and significant enough that it probably warranted my attention. Like, I wouldn't be wasting my time if I read it. So, this morning, while my daughter was still sleeping, I actually read through the whole thing. I think this augmented reality version, the formatting is a little bit different, maybe, than other versions. I think this is set up more like a picture book with big spreads. I think there are other versions you can read which are more like a paperback. I mean, they still have the big pictures, but I think the text is arranged on smaller pages often. How many pages is this? I think it's 95. I think a paperback version of this book, I was looking this up on the internet earlier, was 126 pages. So yeah, basically like a novella. Yeah, where to start here, huh? So I'm gonna go through and talk about stuff and potentially spoil a lot of stuff if you haven't read the book. And I guess I'm gonna assume maybe an audience here who hasn't read the book, maybe doesn't mind me spoiling it. Although yeah. Why would you want to listen to me ramble about this book, huh? I don't know. There is on YouTube, there is of course an audio and video recording of this book. I'll link to one of them in the descriptions down below. I think it's an hour and 45 minutes. I'm not going to talk for quite an hour and 45 minutes, but I probably will ramble on for some time. So you might just be better off just watching the video or listening to the book. According to Wikipedia, this book was originally translated by, I've forgotten her name. There was one woman, and for several years it was just her translation. Then recently, Wikipedia said by 2019 there was 8 translators. The translator of this book looks to be Bonnie C. But she's actually not listed on Wikipedia as one of the translators of this book. So, yeah, I don't know. But I have compared this with some of the other versions online, and this does seem to be the complete text. I don't know who to credit the translation with. Um, it's yeah. Uh, Sorry, there's a lot of background information to talk about. I'm not quite sure where to start, but maybe start with the stuff I learned on Wikipedia. So the author's name, and I'm not even sure how to pronounce this. Obviously, it's French. Um, seemed like he was an interesting guy. He was I got the impression from Wikipedia that he was one of the preeminent French authors of his day. He was also an aviator. Uh, and he was also active in the wars. I think he was involved in World War One, but then in World War Two, he I guess flew some missions against Germany. But then once France was overtaken by the German government, apparently he uh, moved to Quebec or North America, where he was trying to get the Americans to join the war against the Germans, and was offering to fly reconnaissance missions, even though he was, I think, in his early 40s at that time. Um, at the same time, though, apparently, again according to Wikipedia, he did not get on with Charles de Gaulle. And so, for that reason, he was kind of antagonistic to both the Vichy government and the Free France forces. And Charles de Gaulle apparently spread rumors that he was pro German, which caused him to go into depression and fits of drinking. During that period, he was depressed, and so somebody recommended, depressed and stressed out, so somebody recommended working on a children's book to work through some of his depression and anxiety, which probably explains some of the depressing themes in this book. Uh, and there are a lot of autobiographical things in the book. So, for example, the book starts off with the narrator. Well, actually, it doesn't quite start off that way. It starts off with talking about a Jungle Book he read as a kid, but the what do you call it? The main story starts off when the narrator is in the desert because his plane crashed in the desert, and he only has a certain amount of drinking water, and he's got to get his plane fixed before he dies of dehydration. There's a picture of the desert somewhere in this book. I could have sworn I saw a picture of the desert somewhere in this book. Um, and that again, according to Wikipedia, is based on a real life incident. He was flying from, I think, Paris to Saigon, uh, which, yeah, I'm currently in Saigon right now, so that's a little local connection. Trying to break the speed record for that flight, and crashed in the African Sahara Desert and nearly did die of dehydration. Another time, I think he broke his bones in a plane crash and was recuperating in where was it? Somewhere in South America, I forget where he had a view of three volcanoes. So that was like on the Little Prince's planet. The flower that the Little Prince cares for is apparently based on his wife. The baobab trees, which will take over a planet if they are not carefully weeded out each morning, is based on Nazism, people think. The little fox in the desert is based on like a fox he saw in the desert. So like the Little Prince kind of dying near the end is based on the death of his brother. Um, so yeah, lots of autobiographical elements mixed in there, and also, I mentioned the baobab trees representing Nazism. Obviously, this book was written during World War II, by a Frenchman who was in exile from his country. So there's the historical and political element to it as well, which lends it an degree of fascination. This book was published in English and in French in North America. I believe it was banned in France because it was the Vichy government that was controlling France, and he was actively trying to get them overthrown at the time. So I guess any book that gets banned by the Nazi proxies, the fascist government, gets extra points. Although, again, de Gaulle didn't like him either, so he was banned by both sides, maybe, or something. But after the war, it was published. But he actually disappeared flying a reconnaissance flight, or died during flying the reconnaissance flight. So it was after his death that this book was published in France, in his home country, which is, I think, one of the reasons why this book had such a reputation, because it was like his last book, and presumably that's why people are speculating about what does this represent or what does that represent, because he disappeared very shortly after this book was written, so there was no one to, he wasn't there to answer questions about it. So, that's all by way of background. The book itself has an interesting beginning. This is something that, actually, why don't we start with a dedication to Leon Wirth. Leon Wirth apparently was a anarchist, Jewish anarchist, but also a supporter of the Bolshevik government in the early days, I think. Am I remembering that right? And this book was dedicated to him. I think another reason why it got banned in Vichy France. Although he apologizes for dedicating the book to a grown-up. So he dedicates it to Leon Wirth when he was a little boy. The book actually starts off with nothing about a little prince at all, which confused me when I first encountered these chapters. I was expecting it to start off with, the little prince on his planet and the little prince's adventures. But it just starts off with the author reminiscing about his childhood. Sorry, I say author, but everything I've read on this book, the narrator is not the same as the author. So there's a narrator who's has some experiences which are based on the real life experience of the author. But he talks about a jungle book he read when he was a kid, and how he was fascinated by boa constrictors and how they took so long to digest their meals. So he made a picture of a boa constrictor digesting an elephant. But whenever he would show this picture to the grown-ups, they would always just say, "That's a hat." They couldn't understand that it was a boa constrictor digesting an elephant. So he talks about how grown-ups just never understand anything, and it's tiresome for kids to be always explaining stuff to them. So this is obviously a book which is maybe pandering a bit to children's sensibilities. I remember when I was a kid, I was a sucker for this kind of stuff. Books or movies which would say that kids are actually smarter than grown-ups. So if you want to write for kids, that's a good way to sell it to them. But there is also this grown-up romanticization of maybe the child's brain. He talks about how grown-ups can't really understand all these things, but kids understand them. And then from chapter 2, he's stranded in the desert when this little prince just appears to him. Now, it's a little bit hard to get a sense of scale from these pictures, isn't it? Maybe there's a picture later on. You get the sense that the little prince is small enough to be held in his hands. I forget if there's a picture which shows up for scale. So the little prince shows up and asks him to draw him a sheep. And then he's trying to figure out who the little prince is and where he comes from. The little prince doesn't like to answer questions, but gradually finds out that the prince is from an asteroid. They have some conversations. Then, at a certain point, the perspective abruptly changes to the little prince. In a way that's a little bit awkward. There's no transition. It's a little bit unclear how the narrator knows the story of the little prince's adventures, because it's stated quite clearly earlier that the little prince didn't really give out a lot of information about his background. But the little prince starts out on an asteroid, and he goes to various other planets where he encounters various people who are caricatures of, I don't know, some sort of human folly. So there's the king who wants to order everyone around but doesn't have any subjects. There's the man who just wants to be admired. There's the drunkard who drinks to forget the shame of drinking. There's the businessman who claims to own all the stars. There's the street lighter who is constantly lighting and then extinguishing the street lights. There's the geographer, who has never actually seen any of the rivers or mountains. He just records what's reported to him by the explorers. And then the seventh planet is Earth. He encounters a snake. We'll come back to that. He encounters some flowers. I forgot to mention that. There's a flower on his home planet who's very vain. Again, apparently this is based on the author's wife. Then he encounters a garden of flowers, so he realizes that his flower is not unique. He encounters a fox who wants to be tamed by him. And then, various other things. And then that's all by the way of the little prince's backstory, I guess, before he meets up with our narrator, who is stranded in the desert without anything to drink. They find a well and get water somehow. It's all a little bit mysterious. One of the things I read, I think this was again off of Wikipedia, is that the whole narration is just assuming a child's logic. And then he wants to go back to his home planet. So the way he does this, and again, it's only really explained in vague terms, but he gets the snake to bite him. The snake had offered to bite him as a way to send him back to his planet. And that causes his body to die. And then he's allowed to transport back to his home planet. Now, on his home planet, all the narration indicates he has a corporal form on his home planet. So it's not that, I don't think it's that his soul, his body dies and then he just has his soul left. One gets the impression that he's reincarnated on his home planet. Again, it's like a lot of this stuff is left vague. To be fair, I think it's left deliberately vague. Again, Wikipedia said that, the author was composing this. He was constantly cutting out stuff. So it was like 3 times as long originally. but he just cut stuff down and cut stuff down to keeps things as economical as possible, keep the wording as simple as possible. And again, coming from Wikipedia, the author had a brother who died. I think it was a younger brother, if I remember correctly. And when his brother died, he said something like, "I'm apologizing for all this trouble. It's my body," implying that there was a part of him which was separate from his body. You know, the old what's it called? Dualist philosophy, where you have a body and a soul which is separate from your body, and that his soul was being inconvenienced by the frailness of his body. And this is again the style of the narration here. You understand, it's too far. I cannot carry this body with me. It is too heavy. So the prince dies, or his body dies, in order for him to be transported back to his planet. It's all a little bit unclear, but it seems to me to be pretty obviously a metaphor for the afterlife. You know, we die and then our souls are transported to the afterlife. This is actually one of those things that I didn't actually find stated explicitly on Wikipedia. Perhaps because it was just so obvious, nobody thought it needed to be stated, maybe. I'm actually not sure about the religious persuasion of the author. It seems to be a Christian view, huh? Or a metaphor for a Christian view, because again, the prince is not literally going to the afterlife. He's going back to his planet. And then there's this really melancholy ending here. This is to me the loveliest and saddest landscape in the world. It is the same as that on the previous page, but I have drawn it again to impress it on your memory. It is here that the little prince appeared on earth and disappeared. Look at it carefully, so that you will be sure to recognize it in case you travel someday to the African desert. And if you should come upon this spot, please do not hurry on. Wait for a time exactly under the star. Then, if a little man appears who laughs, who has golden hair, and who refuses to answer questions, you will know who he is. If this should happen, please comfort me. Send me word that he has come back. Yeah, and then that's how it answers. So the author has formed a deep attachment to the little prince, even though they've only known each other for a few days, and this is 6 years later. And he's in need of comfort, any sign of the little prince. Which, yeah, brings me to an observation or a point. This is like a lot of children's books. One gets the impression it's a children's book that's not really made for children. And this is, yeah, again, this is something that's, according to Wikipedia, been something people have pointed out about this book since day one, since it got published. I mean, obviously, it's not really an adult book with all these pictures and stuff like that. The narration seems to be using a sophisticated language, although that might be the translation. I was comparing this a little bit against the words used in one of the translations on the audiobooks on YouTube. And there seem to be different levels. But yeah, the at least in this translation, the words used aren't really for young children. I mean, here we go. When one wishes to play the wit, he sometimes wanders a bit from the truth. I have not been altogether honest in what I have told you about the lamplighters, and I apologize. Sorry. And I realize that I run the risk of giving a false idea of our planet to those who do not know it. Men occupy a very small place among the earth. So, I don't know. How old is your average child when they understand that kind of vocabulary? I've lost my sense of these things a bit from having lived abroad for so long and rarely interacted with American children over the past 20 years. But it's somewhat sophisticated vocabulary. And then the themes and the morals of this book, although told in a very simplistic way, I think are often things that children aren't ready to process or aren't interested in processing. And I don't think it will do children any harm to be exposed to these themes. But I think they're often quite things that children aren't ready for. Again, I don't mean like they're not ready for it in the sense that you're going to screw them up if you introduce it too early for them. I mean they're not ready for it in the sense that they're just not interested in contemplating this. I think that there needs to be a certain level of cognitive development or brain development for this kind of abstract thinking about these philosophical questions. And it strikes me as a type of book that teachers would read to children or adults would read to children, but that the children would not be inherently interested in themselves. Like the children would be more interested in, silly or fun adventure books rather than melancholy philosophical books. Of course, I say that. I started out this video by saying that my daughter asks me to read this book to her every day. But my daughter doesn't understand it. She just is looking at the pictures and listening to my voice. And as some of these themes about the drunkard who drinks to forget the shame of drinking, the man who's obsessed with calculating his wealth. I don't know. I guess some of this could be understood by children. I don't know how much interest they would have in it. I mean, yeah, as a kid, I don't think I would have been interested in this book. But yeah, it's whatever else you might say of this book. It's had a huge influence, hasn't it? I mean, again, the Wikipedia page on this book just has so much info. I think there's maybe more text on the Wikipedia page about this book than there actually is in the book. Talking about the different theories people have had about it, the different adaptations and homages to this book, and yeah, I mean it's however you cut it, it's a classic. So if you haven't read it, I guess it's worth checking out. So I might just stop this review here. Yeah, there's more things to talk about, but a lot of my commentary would just be repeating what's on Wikipedia anyways, huh? You can just check out the Wikipedia page for yourself. So I will finish up here.